What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Chris, I don't know about you, but 10-0 sounds a lot sweeter than 9-0, right? This is a team that is off to an unprecedented start. It is the 15th team in NBA history to reach 10-0, and it's a crazy feat. It's something that I don't know coming into the season if fans after the 0-4 preseason would have expected. But Chris, what do you like? What do you see? What do you got to say against the Golden State Warriors?
So I think we have to start here, Ethan. I think we have to be reporters first and foremost. Yes, 15 teams in NBA history have started 15-0. Only 3 of them have won an NBA championship. That's not to put any cold water on the Cavs or anything like that. It's just to put it in perspective what they've done and what other teams in the past have done as well. Because here's the bottom line, and we know this. Banners aren't hung in November. Ty Jerome said it after the game. It's early. It's only 10 games into the season. Kenny Atkinson has talked about it's early. There's still so much left of this season, so many things that we have to do, so much room to grow. Obviously, the Cavs weren't pleased with their second half, and they shouldn't have been. But the first half, Ethan, my goodness, that's something that we talked about on the podcast, the most recent podcast. Golden State is a formidable opponent, right? That was not Washington. That was not Detroit. That was not Toronto. That was not Milwaukee sans Giannis. That was not Orlando without Paolo. That was Golden State. They were 7-1. They were coming off a win against Boston. They were the number 2 ranked defense in the NBA going into that game. And in the first half, Golden State was helpless. Golden State was answerless. Golden State looked completely overmatched. The Cavs did to the Warriors what the Warriors during the dynasty years did to most teams. They thoroughly dominated and outclassed their opponent and made it a laugher. They had fun at the opponent's expense. That's what the Cavs were doing in the first half. That was as good of a first half as any team in NBA history has had. The margin for the lead that the Cavs had in the first half was the 8th highest margin in the shot clock era. That's how good the Cavs were. So yes, there was a letdown in the second half, and Kenny Atkinson was upset, and the players were upset because there's a standard here, and they've got to live up to that standard, and they've got to continue to preach habits, championship habits, whether it's the third quarter, whether it's the fourth quarter, whether it's the middle of a road trip, whether it's the middle of December, whether it's right before the All-Star break, coming out of the All-Star break. You continue to preach habits over and over and over again so that you can lean on those when you get to April, May, and June. But a lot is working really, really well for the Cavs right now. And I think the biggest thing, obviously, is the offense. This looks like an unstoppable offense at the moment. They're probably not going to shoot the way that they have in the first 10 games for the rest of the season, but Golden State, again, number 2 defense in the NBA, and they had no answers for the Cavs offense.
I think it's really funny, right? And obviously, I'll go back to being a reporter in a second, Chris. But Kenny Atkinson keeps saying that they're shooting over their head. It's not possible for them to keep shooting that as well as they have been shooting for the first 10 games. And then the next day, they come out and do it better, right? Like we talked about it. You mentioned it. 83 points at halftime, right? To my knowledge, that's the most in a first half in Cavs history, right? And it ties any half for the Cavs in team history as well. So that on itself. Then you talk about just what this team has been able to do offensively. Talk about they're the best offensive rated team in the league by about 3 points, like per 100 possessions. That's different. Like it's to a different level. And I know you say it can't happen again, right? And there is no prediction that you can say a team goes from what they did on Wednesday against the Pelicans, which was still good, and then bring it back and do even better against the second-ranked defense in the NBA and the Golden State Warriors. And for me, Chris, it's not only the effectiveness, the passing of the ball. Obviously, I talked to Kenny Atkinson after the game, mentioning to him that they had 22 assists on the 28 makes that they had in the first half. So
Mm-hmm.
it felt like they were sharing the rock. There was no stagnant offense until the second half. They were able to get people open because they kept moving the ball, and the Golden State Warriors simply couldn't keep up. Right? The
You
ball
talked about the
always.
first half, Ethan. Think about the first half. Just think about this for a second. 83 points in the first half. A 41-point lead over the 7-1 Golden State Warriors. That was their record coming into the night. Donovan Mitchell had 7 points. 7. He's in the MVP conversation. He's one of the best players in the NBA. He's the leader of this team. He's the multi-time All-Star. They did all of that to the Warriors in the first half, with Donovan having 7 points. And it shows the depth of this team. It shows the balance of this team. It shows the connectivity of this team. And it shows their willingness to share with each other, just like you said about their assists.
And Chris, like, the best thing, the biggest thing about this team, about the scoring of this team, is where they end the game, right? 130 points or more in half of their wins, which already ties the franchise record for a season. We got 72 more games to go,
Yeah,
Chris.
I
Like,
know.
this is, I know you know. we got a long way to go. But Chris, this is great, right? And putting my reporter hat back on.
Yeah.
Tristan Thompson, I talked to him exclusively on a one-on-one after the game, had to give a post-game speech
Mm-hmm.
after the franchise records that we talked about, all the good things that had happened. He was not satisfied with what happened in the second half, right? This is a team that last season, a couple of times, more than enough to make this point, had teams come back into the game because they simply let off the gas.
Yeah.
And basically, what Tristan was saying is, if we want to prove that we are different from what we were last year, we want to go further than we did last year, we have to have a different mentality. We cannot get complacent. It doesn't matter if we're up by 40, 50, 60. We have to continue with the same mindset. You mentioned the principles and the habits that Donovan Mitchell has preached on throughout the beginning of the season. They went away from them. It went to one-on-one ball. The ball got
Mm-hmm.
sticky. They were playing with their food, Chris. And the one constant was anytime Golden State felt like they got back into it, maybe even a little bit, Darius Garland hit a big shot and silenced them just a little bit more.
Well, Darius has taken his game to a different level. It's back to the all-star level. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that he's been the most consistent Cav this year. Although through 10 games, I think you can point to Karras. I think you can point to Ty Jerome. I think you can point to Donovan Mitchell, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley. Everyone's been pretty consistent. But Darius playing at an all-star level, it changes the dynamic of this team. I'll give you a quote from Draymond Green. Draymond Green, the guy who never bites his tongue, the guy who got booed during pregame intros and as he touched the ball in the first quarter when Cavs fans were really, really into the game before it was 20-2 in a blink, and then there wasn't as much animosity toward the Warriors after that. But Draymond Green said, quote, "a lot easier to guard last year." Like, everybody that is playing against the Cavs is noticing just how different this is. And you're going to be more difficult to guard as a team if you're going to diversify your offense, if you're going to make it more creative. And Draymond was saying that he was talking to Steph Curry throughout the course of the fourth quarter, and he was saying to Steph that they just beat us with what we've beaten teams with for years. And he feels like Kenny Atkinson is putting these guys in a position where they're being maximized, where the ball moves a lot more, and it makes everybody a threat. And when everybody is a threat on the court, they're obviously going to be tougher to guard. And even Isaac Okoro was a threat offensively tonight. He was knocking down big-time shots. He was knocking down threes from all over the place. And the fingerprints of Kenny Atkinson and what he envisions for this offense for the majority of the game, not much for the second half, but for the majority of the game and for the majority of these first 10 games, his fingerprints have been all over this team. the influence that he has brought from Golden State, the style that he has brought from Golden State. Stephen Curry saw it tonight firsthand. Draymond Green saw it tonight firsthand. Steve Kerr saw it tonight firsthand. And they all said, boy, that looked familiar.
Yeah, and Chris, I mean, we talked pregame or before the game, even in last night's podcast, about the potential for Isaac Okoro to start, even if Dean Wade was healthy. Dean Wade was healthy, and he was on the bench. Obviously, Dean Wade's coming back from an illness, so he was on a slight minutes restriction, and he was still getting a feel for getting back into cardio and things of that nature for the game. But I had said last night that I think Isaac Okoro was the best fit matchup-wise to help out with guarding Steph Curry. But Kenny Atkinson, thinking ahead, thinking so big, right? Like, put Isaac on Draymond Green to not only just, like, discern the best passer that they have on the team, but also make it hard when it comes to going off pick and rolls, inverted pick and rolls, screens, all these different things, because then you have actions of Darius Garland and Isaac and Donovan, whatever you might say. And Chris, I know you mentioned it yesterday that Darius Garland would take the challenge for guarding Stephen Curry. And I think for the entire first half, Darius matched the minutes for Steph. And every time he was coming out, he was going in, all those different things. And Darius, we talk about the all-star level, we talk about the scoring. Can we talk a little bit about the defense that he has shown to start the season? It's to a different level than I think he's had in his entire NBA career.
It really is. And you can tell. Everybody can see it. Darius is stronger. Darius is more physical. Darius can take more of the punishment that is dished out to him when driving to the basket, but he can also deliver it on the defensive end of the floor. And I just don't think people understand. Last year, when he was going through what he was going through and he was dealing with the fractured jaw, he told me at training camp for my big feature on him coming into this year, he told me that his weight got down to a level that it had not been to since he was a freshman in high school. Like, think about little Darius, freshman in high school, trying to play against NBA players. He was going to get physically abused, and he did. He did at times last year. He got physically manhandled, especially by these bigger, stronger teams. And then when he got into the playoffs, it was Orlando. My goodness, everybody was bigger and stronger than him. And then it was Boston, and everybody was bigger and stronger than him. So you can tell that Darius is more muscular. You can tell that Darius is stronger. You can tell that Darius is being more physical on the defensive end of the floor. And all of the things that he worked on this offseason in terms of in the weight room, that is showing up on the defensive end. Not necessarily on the offensive end, in my estimation, but on the defensive end, absolutely. And, you know, if you can get, and look, part of this, and Darius has talked about this, Donovan has talked about this, when you have the protection of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, it allows you to take more chances defensively. It allows you to be more aggressive defensively because you feel like those guys are going to erase your mistakes and cover up for your flaws. But, like, there were times during the Donovan-Darius partnership where you looked at that backcourt and you said, okay, that's probably going to be problematic from a defensive standpoint. And look, maybe it still does. Maybe it still is a hindrance when you get into a 7-game playoff series and there's a bunch of scouting and there's game planning and there's matchup hunting and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, through the first 10 games, a small sample size, understandably. But through the first 10 games, like, I haven't once felt like, okay, Darius and Donovan together on the defensive end of the floor is going to be problematic for the Cavs moving forward. Because you just haven't seen those guys get exposed on the defensive end.
And Chris, we talked about the joy. We always talk about the joy when it comes to Darius Garland, whether it was him losing it and getting it back this season, but you see it in his play. Like, throughout this last week, we've seen Darius Garland pull out moves that you see on a street ball court with fake passes turning into dimes and dribble hesitations that turn into no-look passes. Whatever you wanted to see, Darius Garland has brought it. And I mentioned this to you in our podcast a couple of days ago about wanting to ask Darius this question about his new signature because
Mm-hmm.
Kenny Atkinson has talked about wanting Darius Garland to get more threes up. He originally in the beginning of the season it was 8. Then in like 7 games of the season it was like we want 10. So
Mm-hmm.
I asked Darius because his signature has been a little kiss to the sky
Yeah.
after almost every triple that he makes. And sometimes his teammates do it with him or even remind him to do it because he's running back on defense so quickly. But I asked him and I was like, is this like, it doesn't feel like showmanship. Is it something that you do as a remembrance factor? And he said, yeah, I'm basically giving blessings like my grandmother and my grandfather used to love on me, used to kiss on me, all these
Mm-hmm.
different things. And my family is so close that is me like paying my testament to my grandmother and my grandfather. Obviously, his grandmother passed away last
Mm-hmm.
season. That was one of the things that he was dealing with, and Chris has reported on this heavily. But I think it's just really great to see not only how he's been able to implement that into his game, but how that could even be lifting him into some capacity. And I know we talked about
Yeah.
his physical strength and all those things, but his conditioning too. I would say he's probably the best conditioned, not only because he guarded Steph, but he also makes the jokes with Donovan Mitchell. Like, I'd be asking him to run to the corners because I'd be sprinting.
I mean, here's the thing. I think we can all admit that the Cavs defensively are a better team when Darius is not on the floor. And the numbers support that too. But he is putting in the effort. He is taking these matchups. He is taking these things personally. He's playing with more physicality. He's playing with more toughness. He's not getting pushed around as much as he did last year. And that's, there are going to be limitations that Darius is going to have as a defensive player. There are size limitations. There are going to be physical limitations. But, like, if they're not as glaring as what they were last year, then the Cavs can live with it, provided that he continues to be this offensive machine that he's been for this team. They're significantly different on the offensive end of the floor when he's on the court versus when he's off the floor. And that's no disrespect to Ty Jerome, who's been really, really good and really steady for the second unit. It's no disrespect to Karis LeVert, who does a lot of ball handling and playmaking for the second unit and stuff like that. But Darius, the way that he has played offensively, like, the Cavs are operating like the best team in NBA history with him on the floor. Like, that's how good they've been when he's been running the show. With him on the floor, they have an offensive rating of like 128, which is incredible, which you don't see very often. So, like, that's the whole thing. There's going to be give and take with players. You know what I mean? And Kenny Atkinson talked about this too. And Steve Kerr talked about this before the game tonight when he was talking about going with the two bigs. Um, if you're going to go with Darius and Donovan together, the hope and the belief is that you're going to be so dynamic offensively that you're just not going to be bothered as much by some of the defensive shortcomings. And, for times last year, Darius just wasn't giving enough on the offensive end to offset the problems that he was creating on the defensive end of the floor. Now he's a better defender than he was, but because his offense has taken such a big leap, you don't even focus on those limitations defensively. You don't even focus on those weaknesses defensively because you're gaining so much with him on the offensive end when he's out there on the floor. So if the Cavs are going to continue to gain at such high levels with Darius out there offensively, then some of the defensive problems that are naturally going to be there, some of the limitations that are going to be caused just by his stature, just because of the kind of player he is, you're just not going to feel those as much. You're just not going to focus on those as much. But when things are going haywire offensively and he's not the offensive engine that he's been, he's not the dynamic offensive threat that he's been, then all of a sudden everything becomes exacerbated.
And Chris, I want to go back to something that we mentioned earlier, right? You talked about Isaac Okoro briefly and how he was knocking down threes, right? Isaac Isaac is a guy that last season and for majority of his career, and even sometimes tonight, was getting sagged off of by
Yeah.
opposing teams, was not being respected, was being guarded by centers in the playoffs, right? And I asked the players in the locker room after the game how this team changes if that dynamic changes. If
Mm.
teams have to respect Isaac Okoro as a shooter, as a scoring threat, as well as what he brings defensively. And to take the words from Evan Mobley and his kind of patented saying, the sky's the limit, right? Because if Isaac is drawing out defenders and is able to put the ball on the floor, use his strength and his speed to blow by defenders that might be a little bit bigger or slower than him, that not only creates more cutting offense that we've talked about a lot in the post-game press conferences, but how that could also create more space for him and for everybody around him, which is the idea of having him on the floor in the first place.
Yeah, I just don't think it's going to change that drastically, though. When it comes to the defense and his reputation and how they view Isaac, and maybe that's going to play to the Cavs' advantage if he continues to knock down these wide open threes that he's going to get. Maybe as his career continues to progress and the scouting report changes and the volume of his 3-point shooting increases, then maybe. But reputations are hard to change. And I'll give you an example. So before tonight's game, coming into this matchup against the Warriors, Isaac took 16 threes in the first 9 games. You want to guess how many of those came with a defender less than 6 feet away from him at the time of the shot?
I'll take the under on whatever the bet is.
Two would be the answer. 14 of his 16 came with a defender 6 or more feet away from him at the time of the release. So they're still ignoring him. They're still disrespecting him. And I think they're going to until he continues to prove it over and over and over again. Because like I said, reputations are hard to change. But here's the thing, Ethan. Coming into tonight's game, Isaac was shooting 57% on those particular open looks, wide open looks. So if he's going to get 14 of those babies in the first 9 games, and he's going to shoot them at a 57% clip, then the Cavs are going to benefit greatly from Isaac and the way that the defenses are going to guard Isaac. And in this case, it's probably not going to be Darius or Donovan benefiting yet. If the reputation changes, if the scouting report changes, okay, then it's different. But right now, who's benefiting from that? Isaac and the Cavs. Because last year, he certainly did not shoot 57.1% on the wide open threes that he was repeatedly given from opponents. Last year, he took 215 threes in the regular season. 201 of them. 201 of the 215 were with a defender 6 feet or further away. That's ridiculous to think about that. Like, they just don't respect him. They don't guard him. He only shot 38% on those. So that's the drastic difference so far. You got to be careful. Small sample size theater. But so far, in the first 9 games coming into tonight, Isaac has been making defenses pay in a different kind of way for leaving him that level of wide open.
That's just disrespectful, Chris. Like, there's no other way to put that. Like, that is plain out disrespect. And I know, because we've seen it literally every time we walk into shoot around, practice, whatever. Isaac Okoro is in the same spot, on the same court, getting the same kind of drills in. It's all on the perimeter, 3-point shooting, and he is relentless with getting these shots up, right? It feels like, obviously, he seems like a confident guy. Every time I ask him a question, he says, I've had confidence my entire life. I've been doing this my entire life, right? But Kenny Atkinson is a guy that we know to get and build confidence out of these guys. For me, Evan Mobley's done it. He's taken more threes. He's taken more shots that we hadn't seen before. Isaac Okoro is now taking more shots with more confidence. There doesn't seem like, and I said this last season at certain points, there's not as much of a I'm going to automatically go into my triple threat and jab step when I catch the
Yeah.
ball. It's I'm
Sort
a
of pump faking. Yep.
Correct. I'm gonna look and see where my defender is, and if there's enough room, if there's a slight edge that I can get my shot up, I'm gonna take that opportunity. And obviously, that
Mm.
comes with the 4 to 6 feet wide open, which allows for him to feel like he has that much room because he does. But I think it's something that we'll have to monitor going forward if this is the offense that allows Isaac Okoro to feel more confident because everybody's taking more threes, everybody's taking more shots, and it's being told to take shots earlier into the shot clock rather than finding the quote unquote best shot.
Yeah, and Ty Jerome's a perfect example of that. How many different times did he push the ball in transition and just step right into a pull-up three early in the shot clock? That's the kinds of things that Kenny Atkinson has been talking about. It's not just Donovan that he's empowered, that he's given a green light to, right? It's not just Darius that he wants taking all these different open threes or threes in general. It's throughout the course of the roster. And Kenny Atkinson has said, when I look at a roster, it's 1 to 18. It's not 1 to 15. In the Cavs case, it's 1 to 17, not 1 to 14 because they still have an open roster spot by design. But, Ty Jerome is feeling like he has the leash from Kenny Atkinson to take those kinds of shots. Like, those were audacious attempts from Ty Jerome. Ty Jerome's not Donovan Mitchell, right? He's not Darius Garland. He's not even Sam Merrill or Max Strus. So for him to feel like he has that kind of leeway, for him to feel that level of empowered and he has that kind of green light, for Evan Mobley to do these early clock pull-up threes because teams are going under screens, that's probably too much. But I think it's easier that way than trying to encourage a guy over and over and over and over and over and over to shoot these shots. That just shows the kind of confidence that Evan Mobley has, and that shows the kind of belief that Kenny Atkinson has instilled already this early into somebody like Evan Mobley. There's no way Evan was doing any of that last year. Right. And I think Ty probably would have been a little bit hesitant to do some of the stuff that he was doing tonight. But it's just different this year. And you can see that it trickles down throughout the entire roster. And that's part of what Kenny was hoping to do. And you can see his imprint on this team when it comes to that already in the early going.
My favorite interaction from tonight's post-game press conference came with Ty Jerome, right? Because I asked him, I was like, this is your former team. You had 7 of 8, 3 of 3 from 3-point range. You were going off. You are known as a trash talker. Did you come into this game with a little bit of an agenda? And he was like, nope, just another game. I was like, you're lying. I saw you turn to the bench and celebrate. It is so funny to me to see because we talked about this last year, Chris. Coach speak, player speak, trying to be mellow after a game and understanding the things that are happening. But in the moment, that dude was the most hyped up when he hit I think it was his second or third three, and kind of gallivanted back to the bench with Karis LeVert after the Golden State Warriors took a timeout. It was electric, one, in Rocky Mortgage Fieldhouse, but two, the energy that team had with the scoring that they had going on was through the roof, right?
And so that's the thing, Ethan. When it comes to some of these guys, there is a specific standard that they're used to that they've tried to bring here to Cleveland. And I think you're starting to sense that throughout the course of the roster. And look, part of this is, and Steve Kerr talked about this pregame, when you have a young developing team that goes through a rebuild, there's an evolution that is naturally going to take place with that team. And it usually happens organically. The Cavs, in some ways, sped it up by trading for Donovan Mitchell, by trading for Jared Allen, by bringing in Max Strus and George Niang, guys that were coming from winning organizations, right? So I think part of this success that the Cavs are having is like the natural growth that was probably going to happen with a lot of their young players getting more experience, being more comfortable, being more confident, learning more things throughout their career. But I think the other thing is Ty Jerome came from Oklahoma City and then Golden State. Golden State specifically, there are different standards. There have been different standards for the Warriors than previous Cavs teams, right? Donovan Mitchell came from Utah, where there were big time standards, different standards than the ones that were here in place when he got here, because like the organizations were in a different place. And Max Strus came from Miami. Like, are you kidding me? I don't know that there's higher standards anywhere in the NBA. So I think you see like the Cavs having this belief of like, yeah, it's a great start and all these different things, but like we were coming off an Eastern Conference semifinals appearance, right? We were coming off a second straight playoff appearance. Like, yeah, the margin of victory of this, the level of dominance of this, that's surprising, that's different, but like we're freaking good. And we believed we were good last year. And we believed we were good coming into this year. So, like, I don't think they want to have this mentality or come across publicly as some team that's shocked by their success. You know what I mean? And like Ty Jerome's not going to say anything inflammatory that all these people want him to say just because they started 10-0. And Donovan is most certainly not going to say something inflammatory just because he starts 10-0. And George Niang's not. And Max Strus is not. And Tristan Thompson's not. And now Darius is starting to understand the same. And Evan's starting to understand the same. And Isaac Okoro is starting to you know what I mean? I think there was this reputation surrounding the Cavs. And like part of it was just where the organization was. But there was this reputation around the Cavs of like, happy to be here. We shouldn't be here. We're ahead of schedule. Let's just take it one step at a time. And like some of that came from President of Basketball Operations, Kobe Altman, which is why I thought it was such a notable shift that he was finally talking championship. He was using the C word at the beginning of this year. And you just felt like there was a different vibe around this team of no longer happy to be here, but we belong here. Why aren't you talking about us the same way that you're talking about these other teams around the Eastern Conference? And that's kind of the way that they've spoken in these first 10 games. And that's why I think you hear Ty Jerome, Donovan, and all these other guys, despite the fact that this is a really, really good start. And despite the fact that not many teams in NBA history have done this through the first 10 games, they're just like, hey, why would we be surprised? We're freaking good.
And sometimes that's all it takes. And Ty Jerome did come up with a different quote afterwards when he got asked about being locked in coming into the game, and he said, "For sure. I mean, it's human nature, right?" Because he said he said they heard that like, oh, the Cavs are 9-0, they haven't played anyone yet, and the Warriors are 7-1 coming in here, and that's a really good basketball team, and like. That was the mentality for this Cavs team. They were locked in from the jump, trying to prove a point, trying to get on that national radar that we've been talking about, that it feels like the Cavs have not been on, right? Like, and I don't think you can get anybody's attention any better than starting 10-0 and having 5 games over 130 points or more, right?
And a margin of victory more than 13 points.
Can't do it much better than that.
That's a level of consistent dominance. And the Cavs are going to benefit from that. We've talked about this season. The Cavs are going to benefit from that if they continue to have these kinds of dominant performances, because they don't have to play their guys as many big minutes as years past. They don't have to play these guys hard minutes in highly competitive games in October, November, and December. Everybody on this roster is going to feel that in a positive way. When you talk about April, May, and June, Darius Garland only had to play 30 minutes tonight. Donovan Mitchell played 26 minutes tonight. Evan Mobley, 26 minutes. So you're stealing some opportunities to lower these guys' minutes with these kinds of consistent performances.
And that's what Tristan was trying to harp on in his post-game speech, right? Like, this should have been a game that they won handedly, didn't have to have their starters play in the fourth quarter at all.
Right.
They would have been able to go into tomorrow, which is a back-to-back against the Brooklyn Nets, and feel completely rested. Sure, they did only have to play Darius 30 minutes, and the Cavs, as of now, only have one player that's averaging 30 minutes or more a game, which is Jared Allen. He's averaging 30.5. And then the rest of the core four is in the 29 range. Obviously, Donovan is right on that cusp, 29.9. But this is a team that wants to have that longevity. And obviously, we remember the last playoff series where injuries kind of derailed them. And that was a main talking point. What they believed they could have done against the Boston Celtics would have been different if they had all of their guys healthy. But this is another lesson for them to keep their foot on the other team's necks. Something that we've been talking about since last year that they want to continue to improve on doing. But Chris, with that, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.